Hi boys and girls, Ranger Kirk here, and you might be wondering why I'm holding a bow and an arrow. Well, let's find out. Because it's made out of wood, and this wood is hickory, which is just strong enough and elastic enough to be used for making a bow, and Native Americans did. And it's part of our program that we call Treemendous Trees. So follow me, we're going into the barnatorium. So Treemendous Trees, that's what our program's on. Just a little bit of science to go with it right here. I've drawn a forest. And so, in a forest, you've got certain layers. It's like a cake in some ways. Here's this upper zone all the way up here. You know what that's called? That's called the canopy. Canopy. There you go, canopy. And that's where all the leaves are like little solar panels. And they're collecting energy, because trees need certain things. They're collecting energy from where? From the, wait for it, what do you think it is? Pretty obvious, from the sun. And they also need minerals from the soil, where their roots can penetrate deeply. There they are on the ground. They're taking up minerals out of the soil. What's also in the soil that they get? I'll give you a hint. That's a big drop of water. So they're getting water, and then they get something from us. What do you think trees get from us? I'll give you a hint. Not bad breath. Something else. Although it could be bad breath. No! We take in, what do we take in? Take a deep breath with me. Carbon dioxide is what they're getting. That's what we give off. Trees love that. So with sunlight and water and minerals and the carbon dioxide that we give off, trees can produce their own food. They create sugar. So that's our upper layer, the high canopy. We got other forest trees that are kind of down below that. And that layer is called the, anybody know? Actually, I should have drawn an arrow like that. It's called the under, because it's under the canopy, understory. The understory. How about that? And you know what? Each layer of a forest like this often has different kinds of animals that live in those layers. But we'll get to that in a second. And then down here is that lowest level. And it could have, green plants growing on the forest ground, like that. Maybe bushes and such. So canopy, the understory, and where everything leaves fall and hit the ground, they call it the litter layer. And some animals, anybody know what our baseball team in Maryland is called? The Baltimore Orioles. And they love to nest in a high canopy. You have birds that sing beautiful songs that we call the wood thrush. They like to be in this understory area. But they sometimes are almost in the litter layer too. So the layers of a forest are like a cake in that they have different kinds of animals and different kinds of habitat for the animals that live there. That's pretty doggone neat. And that's one of the reasons it's so important for us to have trees. There's so many different kinds of trees, and we're going to see that in a little bit. Hang on. Welcome to our table of discovery, boys and girls. I'm Ranger Kirk. Once again, we're in a new spot, and I have all the things, not all, but many of the things that trees provided people with for thousands and thousands of years. I mean, think about it. Your house is probably made out of wood, right? You probably have had a campfire, and you had to burn wood.
But people and humans are pretty smart, and throughout the planet, we all have the same problems. We need food, we need water, we need shelter, we need tools, and that's what trees have provided us with. That's one of my favorite things to talk about. So we can see right here, let's go with just food as an example. Trees give us, if you're a chestnut tree, and we can have a picture of a chestnut a little bit later appear. Here's chestnuts. They come in a big spiny burr, and if you take this outer covering off of them, I don't know if I can break that. Oh, I can. There you go. Inside is the edible chestnut. And here's a bunch of them right here. Isn't that neat? So chestnuts could be picked up right off the ground to be eaten. But what in the heck, Ranger Kirk, if you look at that, you might say, you can't eat acorns. Well, guess what? People did eat acorns, both in Europe in prehistoric times and out west here in the U.S. But acorns have to be processed. They have tannic acid in them. You can't eat them directly. But squirrels can, but we're not squirrels. And there are many other things. If you look right here as well, you will see hard nuts that were once surrounded with a green husk, and they're called black walnuts. And black walnut, I just happen to have, it's a branch right here of black walnut. Have a very spicy odor to them. How many leaves do you see? How many? Can you count them? Well, I'm fooling you because really you're looking at one leaf. It's called a compound leaf. So it has, these are leaflets. So that's one whole leaf from a walnut. And walnuts were used for a lot of different things. Firewood for sure, edible nuts, but I bet you didn't know we could make ink out of the husks of walnuts. And people did during colonial times write letters with walnut ink. So they're pretty neat. And then there are other things trees give that have seeds. This is a spruce cone. This is a white pine cone, spruce pine. And since we were talking about foods, what in the world? Look at the size of that cone. Do you think you can... No, you can't eat that. But you know what? Inside of these big, heavily armed scales, people found edible things. And what they look like, I happen to have right here. And these... This is a cone from California, by the way, called the gray pine. And look at that. What in the heck? More importantly, I'm hungry. So. No, they're good. So even pines can feed us, provide us with wood. After all, what's a match made out of? What kind of wood comes from a match? White pine or aspen they often use. That's pretty neat. There are many different kinds of trees that give us different kinds of things. A good example would be something I have in this jar. It's from Central America. And it's a resin, which is like a hard sap. Not really, but resin is resin. And it's very aromatic. If this is burned, it has an incense-like odor to it. And people there practicing religious ceremonies would burn copal. But you know what? You don't have to go all the way to Central America to get resin. This is from our friend the spruce. Right off the tree. Hardened spruce resin. And what do we use it for? We use it for glue. And we use it for, starting fires, so forth. Keeping them going. It's really good stuff for that. I happen to have a piece of wood here from something called the pitch pine. This is a knot from a tree that rotted. And if you home in right there, you can see how shiny that is. That's because this has tons and tons of resin that is part of this wood. And if you find that in the woods, you can chop that and it will burn with a really hot flame. Let's see if we can get this to burn for us. And we can show you the smoke. It's almost ready. Here we go. It takes a little bit, but once it's started, it really burns hot. And see, it has that orange flame. Now, people actually in cabins in Appalachia would take a pine sprig like this, split out of a piece of resinous heartwood, and stick it in the chinks of their chimney while they sat and read a book. So if you didn't have the money to afford candles, you would burn this. This is a bright flame in a dark place. Out here in the sunlight, it's not as much. But look at that smoke, and that's because the resin is full of all kinds of chemicals that the tree produces, and resin's kind of like the Band-Aid for a tree. But boy, isn't that neat as it burns? Look at that. That's a hot flame. Look at that. I blew it out and it came back on. That's how hot it was. So never play with fire, by the way. Fire is a tool to be used, but not abused. Trees can do many other things for us. Besides food that we were talking about, and flame and tools, it can also be, if you got cracked on the noggin, you could pick the leaves from this tree and, oh, I love smelling this. It reminds me of hay, but something aromatic. See those leaves in there? I collected those. And if you took a handful of those leaves and put them in boiling water, you'd smell the same odor. I know you can't smell it, but trust me, it smells good. And you could smell that boiling up in the water. And then, guess what you would do with that liquid? We need like a little aspirin bottle to appear over here. You know, because what's the chemicals in here are acetylsalic acid, which is aspirin. And so that is pretty cool. So willows, which is what this tree is, produce aspirin that we can actually use. It also has qualities that keep insects out of things. And like if you had a bunch of acorn flour that you had made if you were a Native American and you didn't want pests to get in to whatever you stored it in, you would make a willow bark and twig basket. So this is made of willow and leaves spun together, and it has that same aromatic quality that the leaves had. So the bugs wouldn't like that, and they wouldn't touch your acorn flour in there that you would eat. That's pretty doggone neat. Basic things that trees provide us with, fiber. If you're a basswood tree, your inner bark is this stuff here. And see how that can split and split and split again? And then it can be twisted into cords or rope or string, whatever you'd like to call it. And what can you do with a lot of string? And I mean a lot more string than you see here. Guess what? If you know how, and I don't know how, somebody made this for me, but you can make a net. Look at that, which is really smart. Because you can catch things in a net. You can catch birds, you can catch mammals, which some groups did. You could put this in a river to catch fish. So it's catching fish, and you don't even have to be there. That's pretty smart. So, like I said, humans are pretty smart. We figured out how to do a lot of things with trees and what trees give us. If you needed something to get a root out of a ground, this is not a sword. It kind of looks like it. It's a fancy thing, and it's got dirt on the tip. I wonder what Ranger Kirk uses this for. Well, if you had an edible root, you stick that in the ground, and you push down, and you uproot it. So this is a digging stick, and these were found all over the planet. Every culture had these, you know, both in Chesapeake country, where we are now, Maine, Massachusetts, West Virginia, everybody had digging sticks, and they're very handy. I've used them many times. In other cultures, people use woods for specialized tools. What do you think this is used for? Yeah, this was a weapon in South America. So Native Americans made weapons and bows and arrows and arrowheads out of the wood of the black palm, which is super hard on the outside of it. That's a real pointy thing. It's pretty doggone neat. How about something basic? Your mom's kitchen or your dad's kitchen. What's that? A spoon. I have a lot of wooden spoons. Another tool Native Americans would use. You know what that's called? It's called a rabbit stick. Guess what it's used for? Yep. they would take these as a non-returning boomerang. It could be thrown like this, and it can be thrown sideways. So when it's spinning in the air and that rabbit's running, boy, he's better watch out. And these were used by native tribes in the south, southeast, where we are here. How about if you wanted to carry a whole bunch of things in one place? How about taking that willow, here's the willow here, and I can't do it, I'm not a good maker of those, but how about weaving a basket? That's pretty doggone neat. It's beautiful too, don't you think? Well, you could carry a lot of berries in something like that. How about something really cool? Look at that. I can make these. We call these bark baskets here at Cromwell Valley Park. The bark is folded from a live tree. You take the bark off and then it's sewn together. And this is a tulip tree or tulip poplar bark basket. And native groups made these kinds of things too. They're real quick and easy to make. And in this one, look at this. What in the heck is that? Or this one, I'll pull out another. Ooh, look at that one. Wow. How about that one there? What is that thing? Is that a tool? What are those things called? Yeah, Q-tip. Thank you. Yeah, Q-tip. Is that a perfect? It's not. This is actually thistledown from a flower, and this goes into a blowgun. The whole thing, and the traditional wood from a tree that Cherokee people use was black locust tree. That is pretty neat. We may see a black locust a little bit later on. So that's what we use this for, to hold on to things. And if I go to the trouble of collecting a lot of chestnuts, like I have here, a whole bunch of them, you remember we were talking about bugs getting into things? Well, I don't want bugs to get into this, so I use the wood from a special tree in the area. Got purplish red wood, the inner heartwood. And if any of you have a hamster at home and it might have cedar chips, that's what it is, because it naturally repels insects. So I have put in each of my containers that has food items a split of cedar. So it's a nice natural insect repellent that I keep in there. If we were talking about medicine, which we were earlier, like aspirin with willows, there are other kinds of trees that produce medicines for humans. Let's open this up. Woo! We used alcohol. Look at that color. Isn't that cool? You know what that is? This was used in Appalachia, Appalachian Mountains by mountain people. And it's got the inner bark of black cherry in there. And that is a great medicine. When you take a tablespoon of it, if you have a bad cough, it helps suppress the cough. And if you have phlegm in your chest, it helps get rid of that. So it's called an expectorant. So it is really neat. And it lasts a long, long time in its own jar. So that's cherry. So medicines, foods, tools, chemicals that the trees produce, like these resins, the copal, and the flammable materials that you saw earlier, all come from trees. That is why trees are so tremendous and why they are so important to us, besides oxygen that they give us. But one of my favorite things is that trees are generally green, my favorite color. Look at my hat. So let's go to another spot and see what we can find out. We're in a new location, and we're in a place that's called the Sugar Bush. And no, it's not bushes covered with sugar, but it is these trees that I'm going to indicate, because this is our Treemendous Maryland program. And if you look right there, look at those beautiful green leaves with these. Oh, I'm going to borrow one. Look at those lobes that it has. That's these things right here. And that tells you you are looking at a sugar maple. And sugar maples are the maples that we make our syrup from and our sugar. And we're lucky because Native Americans taught us how to make syrup from the sweet water that came from these trees. And you can only tap them really in February and March. But that's a fun time of year because then we make pancakes and we put maple syrup on them. So where we are is what we call the sugar bush. And it's called the sugar bush in New England because if you look, you can see, look at that dark green tree and that one, and see this one? That's no accident. We planted all these trees about 20 years ago, and in another 5 years, we'll be able to tap these trees for sap. You want a tree that's about at least about 10 inches to a foot in diameter, and it doesn't really hurt the trees. But what we do is we collect the sap, and we need like 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. And you need even more if you're going to make sugar. That's where you take the syrup and you boil it down, and you can either make sugar on the snow, called jack wax, or you can boil it and stir it, and it turns into a brown maple sugar. In either case, these are important trees that humans need, and they give us things that we can consume. And all they need is sunlight, rain from the sky, minerals from the soil, and carbon dioxide, and they make sugar. It's a miracle. So, boys and girls, we've changed our location again, and we've come to a really interesting tree that I find really cool. As a matter of fact, this tree that's above me and over here, this thing was once worth its weight in gold. If we go back 400 and some years ago when Captain John Smith sailed up the bay, this tree had, as far as the English were concerned, medicinal properties that were magical. They thought it could cure almost anything. And so when they brought it back to the old world in England, no one had ever seen it or smelled it or ever even tasted it. And this thing is famous for a particular tree. I haven't told you what it is yet. But it has an Indian name, Algonquin name. And it's called sassafras. And how do you identify sassafras tree? Well, there's a couple of ways. One is you can look at the leaves of a tree, of course. But the leaves aren't always on a tree, of course, in the winter. But in this case, let's see here. Well, first off, I'll pull off one of these leaves so we can look at it up close. And it's what we call smooth and entire. It has no teeth on the edge. It feels kind of fuzzy. And people who are of French descent, they called this phyllo. And they took these leaves and dried them. And the reason they did is that they could put these into soups, and this stuff would cook down, and the soup would get nice and thick, or you could say mucilaginous. A way to test that is to know what this tree is. Sassafras, when you put it in your mouth, and I chew it a little bit, I need more. The first thing I taste, it reminds me of if you chew on your orange peel. So if you peel an orange, I didn't say to eat the peel, but if you chewed on it a little bit, you know what I mean. You taste that strong orange zest flavor. This is not real strong, but it has an orange or a citrusy flavor to me. So a dried leaf of the sassafras was something that the French used to thicken their soups or make gumbo with. So that's one way. And I can tell this leaf in my mouth, I mean, it's getting really slimy in there. But I like it. So that's one of the leaves. Now it has other leaves that are like a mitten. Let's see if we can find a mitten leaf. Ooh, first off, it also has a third type, which is like this, a ghost. Here's the ghost, and here is his hands, and I found one right here. See the ghost? Ooh. So it has 3 lobes. So that's one way to tell. Now we need to find a mitten. And I think we spotted one up right here. Here it is. This tree is unusual. It's got more of the simple kind of leaves. Look, there's the mitten on the glove. And I even saw one sassafras tree at another park I used to work at called Oregon Ridge. And it had 4. It had 4 lobes. It looked like a cow's udder upside down. So sassafras is pretty cool. The coolest thing about it is its roots underground, which have a smell and a flavor of like root beer, which is probably where we get the the word root beer from the roots of this tree. But let's go take a look at the bark up close. Come with me. One sure way to tell, and sassafras isn't a gigantic tree, but it's not a small one either. It often grows in hedges. But I can see right here, take out my trusty knife, come up close, and right here the bark. Watch this. I'm going to scrape away the outer bark. This won't hurt the tree. Look at that color. It's a beautiful orange. Isn't that neat? And more importantly, when you smell it, it smells like cinnamon. So that's our friend the sassafras tree. It's really a neat tree. The roots are underground and it takes a little bit of work to get them. But when you do, you can make one of the most delicious teas in the natural world. It's something. Let's go visit another tree. Well, boys and girls, you know, we've seen a lot of different trees. The sassafras was pretty cool, but there's another tree which is neat. And it's neat because it's the biggest tree in the eastern forests. And it can grow to be 200 plus feet tall. That's a tall tree. And we happen to have a small one right here, but we're going to take a look at a bigger one in a bit. And I'm going to hold this down so you can see it. Look at these leaves. Aren't they beautiful? Wow. This thing always reminded me of a cat's face. I don't know why. But if you were looking at a cat head on, here's his ears, you know, and here's the fluffy sides of his cheeks. So if you had a cat nose right there. Yeah. Or you could say it looks like the profile of a tulip to me. This tree actually does get flowers on it that look like tulips, and I think we'll see some in a little bit. But it's called the tulip tree. Most people know it as poplar, but there are aspen trees that are poplars too. So I usually call this tree the tulip tree or tulip poplar tree. And it's pretty doggone neat. It's a beautiful shade tree, but more importantly, people all over the world, especially in tropical countries where they needed to make containers to hold things. We saw bark containers earlier. What about a leaf container? Well, if you take your poplar leaf and get close and fold him, then we fold him over like this, so we have all those lobes together. Then we take, it's a little bit tricky at first. So you hold them all together. You take the petiole, that was attached right here. And then I'm going to insert this through the leaf. There we go. And then, if you were out berry picking, look at that. You'd have your very own berry cup. Or if you were at a beautiful spring where you knew the water was fresh, you could dip that into the spring water and how about that? That's your own native-made leaf cup. Or it could be a sailboat. That would float in water. Boy, it would sail down the stream. That's pretty cool. Let's go see a big daddy tulip tree. I wanted to show you why the tulip tree gets its name. Here are some of the flowers. Now these grow high up in the upper stories of the tree, the upper canopy, way up there, and it has a tulip-like flower. Look at that. Here's one. This one's a little bit more, from storms blew them out of the top of the tree. Look how small the leaves are up near the top. And as you get lower down the tree, here's another one. Lower down the tree, the leaves get bigger and bigger. As the shade increases, the leaf area has to get bigger in order for them to collect enough sunlight. But when you're up high, you want to be thick and tough. And so the leaves up high on the upper branches are coated. The other thing about tulip trees and their flowers is it's one of the biggest nectar crops for honeybees and beekeepers in the state of Maryland. Two major honey crops. One is tulip tree honey, which is real dark. You wouldn't think it would be dark from this light blossom, and then black locust flowers are blooming right now too. And that's a sweet, light, fruity honey. But I love both of them equally well. The tulip tree is an amazing tree because they grow tall, and they're the tallest tree in the eastern North America. And what's really amazing about it is that it got really big during the colonial period. And Daniel Boone himself moved his entire family down the Ohio River by cutting down a giant tulip tree and hollowing it out and making a canoe. How about that, kids? I'd like to see anybody do that today with an axe and a other simple tools and a froe or adze. Boy, that's amazing. It's almost superhuman. But the tulip tree is one of my favorite. It's a big part of our eastern forest, and it has the habit of, and I don't see, oh, there's one, I think. Yeah, here's why it's so abundant. It has little helicopters called samaras. So there's this from last year. After the flowers are pollinated, they'll grow into these clusters of seeds. Maybe we'll have a dub-in of what the tulip tree seed pod looks like. Then these split off and they spiral through the air and they plant new ones. So this is a pioneering species of tree. It can actually move, you might say, because its seeds can fly on the wind rather than a heavy acorn, or think of a heavy walnut falling directly to the ground, requiring an animal to move them. This one has the wind and they can really fly. So that's pretty neat. Let's move on to another tree. Boys and girls, take a look at these beautiful leaves. Look at those sharp teeth that they have on the edge. You know what we have here? This is pretty cool. In Cromwell Valley Park, it's an American chestnut. And it's a tree that was wiped out almost entirely throughout the entire Northeast by a fungus, unfortunately, that was brought over from another country. But this one seems to be holding on here and might even at some point in time flower and produce chestnuts again. It is really neat. We happen to stumble across this thing here. I'm going to go over here where I can get it, take a look at the lower leaves. There we go. So it's called Castanea dentata, and that's because the edges of these leaves are dentate, or big heavy teeth. Look at that. That's how you can tell. There's much longer leaf than a Chinese chestnut, which also grows in the area. But this is our native tree. And somehow it's managed to survive the fungus and is growing right here in Cromwell Valley Park for you to discover. It's growing over the top of the Willow Grove Trail. So that's how you can find it. It's kind of rough barked here, but look how smooth it is in these branches coming up. So there's actually, chestnut keeps coming up from the roots, from underground. So they're still here in the forest, but they're just not what they used to be. As a matter of fact, I can see that swelling right there? It's probably hard to see. That shows you some of that fungus is affecting this part of the tree. I can see it. It's called a canker. It's nasty. Hey kids. Now we're really in the woods, and we are where the beech trees are. How do I know? Look at this smooth bark. It is a beautiful tree. These trees can live for centuries, too. There's some beech trees in Cromwell Valley Park that are gigantic and that are well over 100 feet tall. So we know that the trees are already a century old in many places. Hard to say about this guy here, because trees, when they're in competition with each other, have different growth rates, really. If this tree had all the sunlight it wanted and all the nutrients it wanted and all of the carbon dioxide I could give it, this tree could grow and be very, very big. But if it's in competition, which it is, look at this beautiful shade we're in here. It's 10 degrees cooler in this forest. Then this tree will grow slower and won't be as large. So that's the neat thing about it. But it's very open in here. Look how open it is. Yeah. So these trees throw so much shade down that only plants that are really well adapted to living in places like this, like Indian cucumber and partridge berry, can actually grow here. Like this good example. This little sapling, we go, oh, it's a baby. Well, you know what? That thing might be 30 years old. Look how small it is. It's just that it's waiting for its day in the sun, you might say. Yeah. Let's go over here. American beech grow, and we have a whole forest floor. I can show them to you what they produce for wildlife. See that? These are called involucres. That's a funny name for a structure that held last year's seeds or nuts. And beech nuts are eaten by a wide range of animals. Bear would like to eat them. Deer would eat them. Squirrels would eat them. Chipmunks would gather them. Even people can eat beech nuts. There's not a lot in these, but they can be eaten by people too. So this whole forest floor, these trees must have produced a lot of fruit last year because that is all over the place. We can go over here where there's a little bit of sunlight and you can get a view of, look at all these beech growing here on the side of the forest. See the gray bark on this big guy right there. It's a magical place to be, and on a hot summer day, you should come here and explore at Cromwell Valley Park, right off of the Willow Grove Trail. Let's go to another spot. Kids, guess where we are now? We're at a crossroads on the Willow Grove Trail. Literally, it goes that way and that way. But we stopped here because I saw this tree above me, and I'm going to pull down the branch. And guess what we have here? We've got red mulberries. But you may say, Ranger Kirk, they're not red, they're white. That's because they're not ripe yet. But you can see one right here is just starting to turn pink. And eventually it'll get dark purple. And these are eaten by a wide range of wildlife. Guess what? We can eat them too. I've had mulberry jelly. I've had mulberry wine. It was really good. But if you eat unripe fruit, I know of a couple people who have done that before, and it can make you really, really sick. I guess that's why humans have color vision, so we can see, usually when things turn dark or purple or red, it means they're ripening. This was used for making caterpillars eat these leaves, and they're called silkworms. And they're not worms at all, they're caterpillars. And silk cloth was spun from the cocoons. Maybe we'll have a cocoon appear magically to one side of us. And this is what they fed on, was mulberry leaves. Isn't that cool? Yeah. So mulberry is actually native to our country, and there was another variety brought here. There's a red and a white mulberry. And those fruits kind of stay white, but a little bit pink. But they can be just as sweet. But this is an unripe fruit here. So that's a pretty neat tree. It's growing in what used to be a hedgerow at this crossroads of the Willow Grove Trail. Let's see a few more trees. Boys and girls, we made it up to a new habitat within the park. We're at the top of the ridge here, probably 450 feet above sea level. And it's kind of neat up here. As a matter of fact, I found one of my old friends. This tree is pretty doggone neat. It feeds a lot of wildlife when it has fruit, and it has a fruit that you guys have eaten before. Maybe not off of this wild tree, but maybe you've had a cherry before. This is a black cherry tree. And you can tell just by its leaves, really. You can see these little serrations on the edges right here. And black cherry is pretty doggone neat for a variety of reasons. Number one, we know we can eat it. Number two, we know it has flowers that are a member of the rose family, which means it has 5 petals, like 5 fingers. And it also was a medicine in Appalachia. If I were to take a branch here and just gently scratch it like this, woo! You can smell, you can't, but I can smell right in here. The odor coming off of that's from something called a gas called benzaldehyde, and it indicates that there's cyanide present. Does anybody know what cyanide is? It's poison. And have no fear, it's found in the seeds of cherries, of pears, of peaches, all members of the rose family. It's amazing. It doesn't hurt us because even if you swallow a cherry seed or the stone of it, it passes through your system. You'd have to be able to crack it open and taste that bitter almond flavor in your mouth. And of course that doesn't happen. And this feeds all kinds of wildlife. But that inner bark, when that was used by people up in Appalachia, in the Appalachian Mountains, they would take that and soak it in moonshine, essentially, and make a cough syrup out of that. And I think we saw some of that earlier on in our travels today. So it's really a neat tree, and it's really can grow to be quite large. 3-4 feet in diameter if it gets old enough. And it's one of the most important trees in Pennsylvania, as an example, for furniture and veneer, which is they literally take logs and peel them on a gigantic lathe. But I like the tree for itself. It gives us oxygen, it gives us food, it gives us shade. So it's 10 degrees cooler here in this shady spot than over here in the sunlight. So why don't we travel to another spot? We're just a little ways down the path from where we were seeing our friend the cherry tree, but I've come across another tree that I really like. Number one, you guys saw it when we first started this segment. You remember the bow that I had? And I said, this thing is made out of hickory, which is real flexible and real strong. Well, it was the tree that native people picked for choice for making a bow, for sure. And here's one right here. This may or may not be a young tree. It's a small tree, but it could be an old tree, just that it's been underneath a lot of shade so it doesn't grow fast. That's a possibility. But this is a hickory, and it's either pig nut, might be mocker nut. And how many leaves do you see? I tried to fool you with that before. Do you remember? Is it 2, 4, 6, 7? Looks like this guy's been eaten by a caterpillar. No! It's a compound leaf. It's one leaf you're looking at. But the wood of the hickory is really strong, and most of them bear nuts that animals can eat. Even people can eat them. Did you know, if you've ever had pecan pie, pecans are actually hickories. They're in the same family, same genus. So if you've ever had a pecan pie, you had a hickory pie. How about that? And so it's a really neat tree, and it's just a beautiful tree, and provides a lot of shade and food for wildlife, and it can get big. It can get real big, and it provides us with axe handles, hammer handles, because the wood is so strong, even used for bats and baseball as well. So a great tree. Look for it. Let's go someplace else. Plants have to be specially adapted to live along this bank of the stream. And in this case, it's a tree that likes to have its feet wet. Let's call it its feet, its roots. And it's right here. It looks like a hedgerow. I'm going to step up a little bit, and we can see the leaves. And this thing has the chemical in it that we talked about earlier that can help you if you had a headache. And this is a willow tree. So in the leaves and in the bark, if you were to scrape the bark and collect that and dry them, that chemical stays in them. After all, every plant around us, the trees, the bushes, the herbaceous plants, they're all like little diluted bottles of chemicals. And this one's the same way, except that it has a really beneficial chemical in it, aspirin. Pretty doggone neat. In the spring, it had funny little flowers that maybe some of you know of as pussy willows. And pussy willows are the young flowers or catkins of the willow tree. And look at this. If you did this with other branches, they would have broken by now. Look how flexible that branch is. So hence, people use willow to make baskets. Beautiful baskets. And we saw some earlier that were made from willow trees. It takes special skill to make a basket like that. But look at that. Isn't that something? And it provides habitat, home for animals, for many different kinds of birds that like to live down this area. We were just hearing a Carolina wren singing, and I know that there's yellow-throated warblers down here as well. So come down by the stream, discover the willow tree. It's a pretty neat thing. Well, boys and girls, we've been learning about trees and having a fun time. But you know what? When I'm outside and enjoying nature and I see a particular tree that I find interesting, I may ask myself a question. I wonder how tall it is. Like, for instance, this big old sycamore behind me that's probably 140 years old. And it's pretty big. And I would like to know how big it is. How tall? taller a tree is, the older it is, by the way. Well, how do we do that? Do we need any fancy equipment? No, you just need a stick. And this particular stick, I've marked it with numbers, and it means 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot. So it's 6 feet. It's a little taller than me. I'm not quite 6. Maybe with my hat on I am. But we're going to take myself and the staff, and we're going to stand down there by the tree, and then we're going to do some very simple measurements with a pencil. That's all it's going to take. A pencil eraser, that's what you'll need too. All right, here we go.
All right, hi everyone. This is Ranger B. Feel free to count along with me. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Looks like 15 pencil erasers.
All right, I'm back from the tree. Now, let's find out how tall that thing is. So, I brought my paper brain here, and we got 15, we'll do a little multiplication is what we're going to do. So I got 15 pencil erasers of me down there times 6. So hopefully one of you got the answer already. 6 times 5 is, carry a 3, 30, 6, and then 3, 6 times 1 is 6, 7, 8, 9. That tree is 90 feet high. How about that? That's a nice rough estimate of how tall a tree is. So anybody can do that as long as you have an object of a known size. And I use 6 feet just as a reasonable, something to, as a measurable object. And so that tree is a sycamore tree. And sycamores are one of the biggest trees in eastern North America. They used to get so big that people actually camped inside of them, which sounds crazy. But a big old tree often is hollow on inside. And sycamores are famous for rotting out sort of in the center, and their branches rot out, which create all these wonderful homes for animals to live in. And in the case of colonial times, you may have had a tree that was 200 years old, and it was 16 feet across and hollow on the inside. And so there are known times where people camped inside of them. Bears would hibernate in sycamore trees. So it's really a cool tree. It really is. Well, kids, I thought it was appropriate to end this at this venerable old tree behind me. This is a sycamore. It's a champion tree in Maryland in terms of its size and its age. We think it was a matrimonial tree. What's that? Well, it was a tree that people planted in honor of their marriage. And we think this one was planted sometime around 1860 or 1863. So this tree is over 150 years old, which is an amazing thing if you think about it. The stories it could tell would be amazing. And it's such an important tree. It's a symbol of our park. It's a part of our park logo and patch because of that unique branch that sticks out from one side. So I thought we'd end it here. We saw a lot of things today while we were out looking at trees. And they're my favorite living thing, if you think about it. They're not animals, but it is a living thing. It's a plant, but still, they're aware of their surroundings and on some level. And you should think about that. Think about all the things that we've seen and did today that trees provide us with. So I wish there were more of them. I wish there were more trees, don't you? So Thanks for coming along with Ranger Kirk at Cromwell Valley Park.